Good evening, members, and welcome to the Scrutiny Committee for Leader, Finance and Performance, which is going out via remote video link on Wednesday, the 19th of May 2021 at 1700 hours. We are joined by officers of the Democratic Services, Legal Services and the management team. First of all, I'd like to conduct the roll call. Vice Chairman, Councillor Pulfer.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Alison Bennett.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Cartwright. Councillor Cartwright. Nobody said no. Okay. Councillor Coote. No, Councillor Coote. Okay. Councillor Crowley, I know, is not coming. She has a substitute for her. She's not been well. Councillor Anne Eves.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Hicks.
Present.
Councillor Jackson.
Present.
Councillor Andrew Lee, he's going to be joining later. He's just finishing work. Councillor Phillips.
Are we not doing this alphabetically? Because my name's B. Brunsden.
Oh, sorry, I will get there, Councillor.
Point of order, Mr. Chairman. Point of order. I think you're talking about last year's membership, not this year's membership. Thank you.
You're probably right. Actually, I've not been sent the correct list or the list. So, Tom, are you there? You had to help me. This just the right list, please. Would you like to conduct it?
Yes,
thank you for that. You're spot on, Councillor Gibson. Thank you.
Councillor Brunsden. Councillor Brunsden.
Yes, I'm here.
Councillor Coote, we've heard from Councillor Cromie's apologies. Councillor Clark, who's a substitute. Councillor Clark.
Present.
Councillor Gibson.
Present.
Councillor Henwood.
Present.
Councillor Jackson.
Present.
Councillor Knight is present. Councillor Andrew Lee is late. Councillor Stockwell.
Present.
Councillor Trumbull.
By the skin of my teeth, Chairman. Just about got here. Yes, present.
And Councillor Whitaker.
Present.
And I'll continue with the legalities around this meeting. The meeting is an advisory meeting and not a decision-making meeting. We're therefore holding it virtually, given the situation with the COVID pandemic and the size of our council chamber. It would not be possible to have a meeting of this size in our council chamber and fully comply with the current restrictions on social distancing. Those obviously may change going forward. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Clark, for that. I appreciate that. Item 2, Councillor Clark is substituting for Councillor Cromie. Item 3, apologies we've received from Councillor Cromie. Item 4, declaration of interest from members in respect of anything on the agenda. If you have anything, please raise your hand. I don't see any. Thank you. Item 5, to confirm the minutes of the meeting held on 10th of March and the 28th of April 2001. Please use your yes, no buttons. Okay, that's been carried by 10 votes to 1 abstention. Thank you. Item 6, to consider any items that the chairman agrees to as urgent business. I have none. So turning to item 7 starting on page 9, the performance outturn 2021 to be introduced by Neil Barton. Mr. Barton, please.
Thanks, Chairman. So this is the outturn performance report for 2020-21. So it covers the period 1st of March 2020 to 31st of March 2021. So performance has generally been good, with 74% of our indicators shown at green, which means they're on or above target. So it's the usual format report you see in Appendix A. We have listed the suite of performance indicators that the committee monitors. We've also have there an update on the council priority projects. And you will see that 7 out of 8 of those projects are shown at green. So as we say in the report, we need to look at these figures in the light of the pandemic. So that started to affect our services in March of 2020. And you recall the first lockdown was on the 24th of March. So some of our services have had to take on more responsibilities under the pandemic and still deliver their day-to-day services. So we highlight in the report environmental health, who've got more responsibilities to check businesses for COVID compliance, and also revenues and benefits, which have been paying out business grants and also administering schemes like the test and trace support and exceptional hardship payments. There's a couple of services I wanted to highlight that have also had a big increase in workload. The first one is the land charges team. You'll see that the number of searches they've dealt with has gone up by 38%, which is a reflection of the property market. And also the benefits team, again, have had a big increase in the number of council tax support claims they've dealt with. And the last service that I wanted to highlight was customer services. It's quite encouraging that over the year we've seen a reduction in the number of complaints and a big increase in the number of compliments received by the service. So in the appendix to the report, where we've not achieved performance, we've tried to include some narrative about why this is the case and what we're doing to address performance. But I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Barton. I've had some pre-submitted questions by Councillor Anne Eves, and I think I'll take them first. And thank you very much for submitting them in advance, Councillor Anne Eves. Although I think some of them, I seem to think there's been a flavour of these questions before. I think some of them might have been answered before, but please, if you'd like to take one question at a time, and we'll move forward on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, this is page 23 of Appendix A. And obviously there isn't much room to write what has actually happened. And I think something has gone badly wrong, and I'd really just like to get to the bottom of it and find out why there hasn't been any progress. And some of these questions have come from residents. So if I could ask, first of all, are we to understand that the original tender for Mid-Sussex electric vehicle charging points was issued without specifying the nature, number and location of the chargers? Because something went wrong with that tender and it never came to fruition.
Emma, I think you're going to take these. Are you relating to charging points?
Yes, I am, Chair.
Thank you.
The original tender did specify the asset sites within Mid-Sussex that would be incorporated within the tender, and which had the capacity to be part of it and to have chargers, but it did not name the number and nature, as that would be done in conjunction with the new supplier as part of a network plan.
Please carry on.
Thank you, Chair. Was the contract actually signed with a winning bidder? And if so, why didn't it come to fruition?
The contract was not signed in the end with the winning bidder because in the final stages of contract, they changed what they were willing to accept, despite the particular issue being something that had been clarified more than 5 times during the procurement process. So they changed the goalposts at the last moment. And we had, on legal advice, we had no other choice legally than to abandon the procurement.
Thank you, Emma. Carry on. Councillor Eaves,
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mrs. Sheridan. So exactly when did you realise you couldn't go ahead with this? And when you realised that, why didn't you move just to the second bidder and carry on with them?
It finally, after all negotiations were exhausted on both sides and on legal advice, it became apparent that about a week before we were due to complete on the contract, and we had to follow the legal advice. Legally, we could not go to the second tender because of the issues that were raised, and the legal advice was that we had no choice but to abandon.
So can I ask through you, Chair, what were the issues then?
Yeah, please.
The primary issue was around the ownership of underground infrastructure at the end of the contract.
Okay.
Please proceed.
Thank you, Chair. So why was there such a drawn out budget approval and procurement procedure? Because this has been going on for 2 or 3 years when the chosen operator is completely funding all costs.
The contract still has a value. It has a value to who we award it to, and we are bound as a public organisation to follow proper procurement practice with regard to contracts over a certain value. Last year, that meant that we had to follow the OJEU processes. Obviously, now post 31st of December, we now have to follow the UK procurement practices. They are equally as stringent and as prescriptive in terms of the value of the contract as to what we have to do. We legally have to procure in this way.
Ah, you're back again. Hello, you froze for a little while, Councillor Eaves.
Okay, sorry, I'll do that again.
Carry on
Thank
with
you,
the next
Chair.
question, please. Thanks.
When the business
you?
model is a revenue share with councils, what mechanism is in place to stop the customers being massively overcharged by the operators who want to recoup their investment? Are there any price controls in place?
Yes, there are price controls in place within the contract, and any change to that has to be agreed through the governance of the contract management.
Thank you. What about a service level agreement to keep everything working? Was this part of the tender, and will it be in a new contract?
Yes.
Okay. What about a rapid at the triangle? How can we be sure that we will get a rapid charger there?
That will be in the new tender. It will be specified specifically by name as a priority site in Mid Sussex for delivery in the first phase.
Okay.
Subject to grid capacity and approval by UK Power Network.
Right. Why are we tied to West Sussex County Council? Why have we gone in with them now? Is it just to share the blame, basically?
No. We are working in partnership with the County Council, who are the highway authority for this area, and with all the other districts and boroughs, because the desire is to create a comprehensive network of electric charging points that work better for the customer, so that they have one system to use across the county that is in a coordinated network that works where they live, where they work, where they visit, where they spend their time. And there is economies of scale in us working together across the county to ensure we get the best deal for our residents.
Thank you. And kind of last question in a way, this is only about 26 chargers, which are still not happening. What about the next 260? Because this really isn't adequate. And really, when's it going to happen? Because we're still waiting. Thank you.
It will happen once we have procured a electric vehicle charge point provider. The first 26 sites will go in, as I've said, in as a priority in phase 1 in Mid Sussex, because we were due to get them last year. So it has been agreed as part of the procurement that those sites for Mid Sussex will be prioritised within the county. That's been agreed with all partners, and then we will work with the other districts and boroughs with the supplier to set up a comprehensive network across the whole of the county that will consider, subject to site assessment, grid capacity, demand, all of the relevant assets across the district that are within our control and within partners who wish to come in on that. So we will liaise with parish councils, town councils, community organisations. There is the capacity to involve all of them in that network planning. Exactly how many of those will roll out in each year, that would be something we would agree as part of the network plan in collaboration.
Thank you, Emma, for your comprehensive answers there. Thank you very much. Councillor Jackson, is your question in relation to electric charging points?
No, Chairman.
Okay, I'll just hold there. What about you, Councillor Janice Henwood? Is yours in relation to electric charging points? No. Okay, well, we'll move on. We'll move on that then. So, Councillor Jackson, you're next, please.
Right, thank you, Chairman.
Refer to the page and the measure, please, as well.
Right, thank you, Chairman. I've looked at the various performance results. Obviously, it's quite important to get the red, amber, green assessment that the targets are properly set. I noticed that some of them have changed since last year. What's the mechanism for assessing those targets, and who makes the decisions?
Neil, would you like to take that?
So what happens is the performance indicator targets are included as part of the corporate plan. So we prepare service plans each year for each service, which sets out the targets. But what happened last year was, do you remember we did a revised corporate plan in September, and it was felt appropriate that we needed, because of the pandemic, we need to go back and revisit some of the targets. So there was a report that went as part of the corporate plan revision in September that that included some amended targets. So you see that some of the performance indicators, we feel it's appropriate not to set a target at present, like things like number of people visiting our leisure centres. Last year it would be impossible to set a target. So that was the procedure that has led us to these targets that you see before you. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Councillor Janice Henwood, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I have 2 points, please, I wish to query. On page 24, I don't understand why percentage of household waste sent for reuse, recycling and composting, why isn't the percentage for composting a different item and a different performance target? It seems quite relevant. They collect our recycled green matter separately, so it would seem quite easy to have that as a separate performance target. That's one question I'd like. The second, Chairman, has to do with on page 26. I would like to know the criteria for a health check. And when we look at page 26, costs awarded against the council, where the decision of the council is overturned, I don't quite know why that's a health check and why it isn't more fully explained, because it seems to me if we're losing money, we need to know about it. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Councillor Henwood. Neil, do you want to take those waste question?
I think those are lumped together, the composting, recycling and reuse rate, because that's the indicator that we submit to government. So the idea is to put those together and try and identify what in the waste stream is not going to landfill. You see the other indicator there is the amount of waste that goes to landfill in kilograms per household. We did formally report on composting separately, but as I say, the reason now is that they all lumped together for national reporting. Your point about the, was it planning? Could you just reiterate?
Planning costs, I think was.
Oh yeah, planning costs.
Excuse me, Chairman. The first thing was what criteria is used for what's called a health check and not actually a target, performance target? What's the criteria, please?
So as I said before in the answer about how we set targets, so where it says a health check, that's when we decide that it's more appropriate to have an indicator as a data only one without a target. So it's still useful information, like the number of people that we have in temporary accommodation. It's quite difficult for us to kind of set a target for that because a lot of that is outside of our control. So those indicators are what we call health check indicators that are for data only. So it's not appropriate to set a target, but it's still of interest to members in what the performance indicator actuals are for the year.
Thank you, Mr. Barton. Councillor Gibson, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I think that the records that we show here really indicate how hard the council has worked over the past year, all the officers, and really that the outturns, I think, are very good indeed. I think that we should just dwell for a second on page 19 under revenues and benefits, and the second row down in the notes. It indicates that the number of claims, council tax support claims, has doubled. And I think really we should think about that in terms of what has that meant in the communities who are actually having to make those claims. I mean, I think that is really where we're seeing the pandemic. I do have a question, Mr. Chairman. It relates to the human resources part on 18. I'm not sure how we set a target for staff turnover. Well, I think I know now that we do it as part of the corporate plan, but just to check on that. But the line above it says staff sickness absent rate. It's not a percentage, it's a value. And I wonder if Mr. Barton could perhaps explain what the value is. Thank you.
Neil, would you like to?
So the staff sickness absent rate is expressed as the number of days off per member of staff. So that's an average figure. So we calculate the total number of days off sick that staff have had and divide that by the number of staff. And that gives you a figure for the average number of days off sick for each member of staff. So we have experienced quite a big reduction in that number this year. So that might be associated with more people working at home. So we're still looking into what the reasons for that are. The second question about staff turnover, that's always been a difficult one to kind of set a target about what is a desirable level of staff turnover. Because in some ways you might want to refresh your staff on a regular basis. In another way, a high level of staff turnover might mean that there's unhappiness with the staff in working arrangements. It might be a sign that people want to move on. So that's always been quite a difficult one to set a target for. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Hicks.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. On page 14, there's two indicators relating to environmental health. And I just wonder if there's a relationship between the two in terms of is the second target a precursor to the first target? And noting the 40% increase in service requests under the first target, is that solely related to COVID, or would there be other reasons for the increase? Secondly, just in terms of the number of legal cases on page 15 has increased by 30% or so, and I just wonder if there's a particular reason for that. Thirdly, in terms of the inquiries received via the central switchboard, and we have also an indicator for contact center for contact forms, but in terms of emails and email inquiries to the generic email addresses like inquiries at, I wonder, are those included in one of those indicators, or are they outside of the indicators? And lastly, on page 20, in terms of the return on tenanted non-residential property, does the percentage return take into account the reduced collection rate and the possibility of bad debts increasing. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hicks. Mr. Clark, did you want to take the legal one, the legal question, the increase in legal cases? You're on mute.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Well, the legal team have been busy during the pandemic. We didn't really ever see a slowdown, but I've got no particular reason why the number is up as it is. But there is plenty of work going on both in planning and property.
Thank you. Neil, did you manage to grasp the other 3 points by Councillor Hicks?
The one on environmental health, those two indicators are linked, about the number in 3 months and the 5-day one. That they're kind of the same number of, they're the same service requests. As you say, those two are linked together. I think the increase, a lot of the increase in service request is down to the pandemic. We've actually employed some more staff. We've got money from the government, and we have people, as I said in the introduction, who go out to inspect businesses to make sure they're COVID compliant. The question about the rate of return on property, I don't know whether Peter Stewart might be the best person to answer that one, please.
Chairman, could the question be repeated, please, and made specific? Thank you.
Councillor Hicks, could you?
So, Chairman, yes, relating to the return on investment properties, and whether that includes account of the reduced collection rate in terms of the possibility of increased bad debts. So on page 15, no, sorry, on page 20, we're showing a return of 6.8%. Does that take into account the fact that the collection rate has reduced to 87% and the possibility of bad debts because of that?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, it does. I mean, it is a difficult one to actually pin down completely accurately. You'll appreciate that rate of return is there's two aspects to rate of return. One is the rent you get, and the second aspect, which is probably more important, is the valuation of the property. And of course, a valuer who are something of a breed to themselves will change their valuation at year end based on their feeling about the market. And you'll appreciate a lower valuation with the same rent will give you a much greater rate of return. So whilst these figures are accurate, we've used, I think, the previous year's valuations, you know, as at basically the balance sheet date as at 31st of March, will be 2020. I would say that you will find a valuer would have changed those valuations. Therefore, the rate of return that's given there may well have changed. So to be taken with a pinch of salt, to be honest, that figure.
I think the last one was in relation to emails submissions. Neil, is that right, Councillor Hicks?
That's right. Thank you, Chairman.
In relation to the indicator about the indicator that has a figure there, that's the number of actual e-forms that we receive rather than emails. There's a lot of activity that we try and get people to fill in e-forms rather than contacting council by phone. So that figure, it just relates to the number of e-forms that have been submitted. I don't know whether Simon Hughes might want to say any more about that indicator.
Mr. Hughes, did you want a comment?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, as Neil says, that indicator purely focuses on the interactions via the website using digital means of transaction. In terms of other emails that come to us, we do monitor all of those. That's part of our digital security measures, but also we look at what's coming in, how quickly are they read and so on. But that's far more diverse because often we will have businesses and residents contacting our staff over, it could be a number of times, but we use that data to make sure that we're not missing anything at all and that we're responding promptly.
Thank you. Councillor Lynn Stockwell, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I've got a few little points, if I may.
Yes, we try and take one at a time because it's sometimes we get a bit, lose track of where we're going. So
Well,
can we take one at a time?
I'll try and,
Thank
yes,
you.
I've got them in some form of order.
Thank you.
First of all, I think the environmental health checks, the huge increase in numbers there, I think the team deserve a well done on that one, because that has gone sort of right way above what we've seen before. So well done, that team. Going back onto the land charges, I noticed we're not on track with that, and I wondered if, because of the delays and the fact that we are also in competition with other legal services, whether we've actually lost income because of the delays that that we've experienced. So I'll leave it at that one and then move on, if I may.
Okay.
Chairman.
Who would like to take that? Is that for you, Neil?
I think that's me, Chairman.
Okay, thank you.
In fact, the income is 34% up.
Oh, good.
We've done a huge number of searches, and we've also retained our share of the market. So although the turnaround time has slipped a bit, actually the performance has been very good.
Thank you. May I continue, Chairman?
Please do, yes.
Oh yeah, okay. Where are we? Rivers and bends. We've done that bit. Full fibre on, that's one of our things going. I noticed from the minutes that we were going to have a report or an explanation of that coming out, and I don't remember that coming. And I wondered if at some point we could have an update on where we are with the full fibre rollout, and from my perspective, particularly with regard to the rural project. So that's that one. And I think the last one I've got on this particular issue is on housing. I noticed that the number of houses, this is on page 27, the number of new affordable houses has gone up. We've done 245, which is really good. However, there were two sites that came around where we lost 8 affordable houses because of the developers basically, crying tears over their viability. How do we get over that? They've been granted planning permission on the basis that they are going to provide a number of agreed social housing or affordable housing. So why are we letting them off the hook? How can we get over that? That's 8 houses we've lost in the last year.
Thank you, Councillor Stockwell. Mr. Clark, would you like to take that last question?
Yes, it's always a difficult business with affordable housing. They get permission and then they produce evidence that the scheme is unviable, and we have to react to that evidence with the assistance normally of the district valuer. But we can't refuse to amend Section 106 agreements if we have the evidence to say the scheme will otherwise not go ahead. So yes, it's an unfortunate practice, but we only do it where there's evidence that the scheme would otherwise not be viable.
Can I just comment on that, please, Chairman? Quite honestly, they've then presented false documents to you in the first instance, which suggests to me that in which case they shouldn't have been granted planning permission in the first place. But I realise it's a legal process, but obviously we do. The fewer people that are encouraged to do that, the better. Thank you.
I do agree.
Chairman, can I interject here and just ask a question on that particular point?
Okay, so as it's on that particular point, yes, I'll allow that, yes.
Thank you. So my understanding of the recent legislation, Mr. Clark, is that as of January this year, and it came into force, there is now a requirement on developers at the very early stages of a site being allocated in any development document for the viability to be included, all of those items that are going to be the mitigations. So, for example, in the case of Bolnoy, some years back, you could not have a situation where Crest Nicholson came in at a later stage and pleaded poverty and could not deliver the relief road unless they had a further 1,000 homes. That now has meant that any development that comes forward through a development plan must be sound through its viability. Am I correct in that thinking? So that should avoid some of the issues that Councillor Lynn Stockwell is suggesting is concerned by. Thank you.
Yeah, yes, Councillor Bruns, it should help to mitigate it. The problem is the market can change, and the developers can also make what's called Section 73 applications, which can amend what they previously agreed to, and that is based on the evidence at that time rather than the time of the original planning application.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. Councillor Alison Bennett, please.
Thank you, Chairman. My question relates to page 22 and the fourth bullet point. So this is about the full fibre infrastructure project and specifically rural fibre, the rural connectivity programme. So it's actually picking up on some of Councillor Stockwell's thoughts and questions. And I did submit these to Mr. Hughes in advance. So for clarity, we did get the written answer that was promised after the last Scrutiny Committee on the 10th of March, and Mr. Barton emailed that on the 25th of the 3rd. And when I compared that with what's on page 22 of this report, it said, I think the written answer said it will be initiated in 21-22. Sorry, today's report says the rural fibre project will be initiated in 21-22. But the written answer following the 10th of March scrutiny said it will be delivered in the coming year. So my questions really are just to get a little bit of clarity about that. Do we know when the work will commence on the rural connectivity programme? And when is it expected to be completed? And is it likely to be completed this year? And in terms of the residents' perspective and what matters to them is actually being connected, when is the earliest that we can expect residents to be connected? And then my final question on this is about, are there villages south of Burgess Hill, the project extends to, which villages can expect to benefit from this, and will any not? Thank you.
Mr. Hughes.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I think in those responses, I think the connection is different between financial years and calendar years. The funding covers 21 to 22. We're looking to commence work in July. And depending on the work that we're doing at the moment, which is the detailed design work, and I'll say briefly what that includes, that may well finish before the end of the calendar year. That is subject to a number of things that we're working through. So, I'll be perfectly honest with you at this point. We don't have a fixed date until we do that detailed design work, and that's because of things like access to roads. It's also to do with where we design and put in things like chambers and cabinets and so on. And those are just devices, if you like, or bits of construction that allow us to connect more fibre to the rural routes. In terms of when will residents and businesses see services or have an opportunity to have access to services, that will depend on a number of things, and we're under those negotiations now with different providers. So it'll depend on how the design is built and where it's built most quickly, because it is possible to connect fibre before the whole of the route is finished. So again, that's dependent on our design. And also where those businesses, so those businesses that provide connectivity, will want to connect to first, and they, just like us, have to make decisions about where they spend their capital. So we're in those negotiations right now. So I can't give you sort of specific answers to those, other than to say that we have learned a lot from the work, the three projects we're involved with already. And one of the things that we're keen to do is engage internet providers and fibre providers early on, so that we can potentially do some of those connections before the whole rural route is completed. When we have answers on those, we will let Cabinet members know. In terms of the route itself, that will, at the moment, and again, it's subject to those looking at surveys and so on, that will go north from Haywards Heath up to Ardingly, and we'll be looking to connect in some of those villages there. And then from south of Burgess Hill, which was your specific question, the route is currently planned to connect up Hurstpier Point, Poynings, Fulking, and right down through into Brighton. Now, it may well be that as we get detailed costings back from our contractors, that we can provide more fibre than that, which would be helpful, but we won't know that until we actually procure the work. And just to pick up on Councillor Stockwell's question, I'll shortly be talking to portfolio holders so that we can look to schedule a workshop for all members to go through our fibre programme and how it works and how we attract customers and businesses. So you'll have more details about the economic impact of the work, but also the social value that's delivered and the routing.
Thank you, Simon.
I hope that answers the questions.
Does that answer your questions, Councillor Bennett?
Yes, thank you very much.
Excellent. I'm just seeing who's next. I think it's Councillor Whitaker, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I've just got a few initial comments. The report said good performance overall. Well, I think we've got sort of short memories. The COVID year has been quite torrid. It's easy now with to sort of start taking things for granted with 70% first dose vaccinations and 40% second nationally. But the year has been unprecedented, a barrage of changing guidance. And I'd like to personally thank all of the staff that have been involved. The goalposts have been moving all of the time. And I think the skill sets of the staff and the leadership shown by the staff and political leadership, I have to say as well, has been fantastic. The green lights have gone from 70% to 74%. Amber have gone down from 22 to 16. The stats have already been mentioned about massive increases of 33% and 38% in environmental health and land inquiries. Page 19, council tax, improved collection rates during a COVID year. That's astonishing. Best collection performance in West Sussex. Another fantastic yes. Page 25, the parks investment, final design stages for many parks across our whole district. So we know that's coming. That's excellent. Councillor Stockwell's already said about the affordable homes increased by 15%, and we know we want to do more on that. And I'm sure that those figures will increase because since the district plan was adopted in 2018, the 30% number has been mandatory. So we know that will come through. And just finally, just one point on the coming back to the electric charging. I seem to recall that in a previous scrutiny committee that the procurement responsibility for this was actually the primary responsibility was with West Sussex County Council, and that the district council was one but 7 district representatives within that procurement network. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's my understanding. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Whitaker. It's good to hear some positive comments, and I thank Councillor Gibson earlier for his positive things. It's good to hear the positives amongst some of the challenges as well. Councillor Trumbull, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, you're absolutely right. I think we're all too apt to say, gosh, aren't things awful? There are some very good news stories here. And I would agree with Rex Whitaker and Ian Gibson on the points they have made. Interestingly, Councillor Gibson raised the points on turnover, staff turnover and absence rates. It was always my understanding that we as councillors are not interested in those unless, because that's a management issue, unless we can see that there is potentially some impact on business output. I've got several points, Chairman, and do you want those one at a time, or do you want?
I think we will. I think it's easier that way.
Okay, so let's go to page 20, please. Percentage of rent due collected, we're at 87%. Now, I'm assuming that's of where we should be at this time of the year. I wonder what that is in pound note terms, and I wonder what the implication is for budgets.
Sounds like one for Mr. Stewart.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I haven't got the figures here, I'm afraid. We obviously do a written response to that. I suppose as a comment, I would say you should appreciate, I suppose, that although many businesses have had issues in the year, generally speaking, the bigger businesses for whom we receive a rent haven't. So, for example, it'd be no secret for members to know that our largest single tenant rent payment is from Marks and Spencer's, who've had I would say probably a pretty good year as it happens and have paid their rent. So you'll appreciate that whilst some of the smaller tenants we've had to make some arrangements with them, our bigger tenants have actually pretty much been unaffected for the year.
Okay, thank you for that, Mr. Stewart. And Chairman, through you, I was just concerned potentially about the impact on budget. Can you just give us some comfort about that, Mr. Stewart?
Well, in terms of budget, I mean, for 2020-21, as members will appreciate, we will be using the general reserve to balance last year's budget as is. Of course, the pandemic, it's very tempting to say it's finished, it's over. It's not, of course. But in terms of rental arrangements, we aren't seeing many tenants wanting to make rental arrangements in the current financial year. So in terms of, if you like, budget for the current year, I don't see any great issues actually with tenants for this year. And in fact, when we start the budget process, amazingly it is in July already, I don't think there'll be much in there around commercial property downturn. Our main issues are around parking, some development management, and of course leisure. That's where if you like the bigger issues are, rather than the commercial property.
Splendid. Chairman, I'm just writing that down. Peter Stewart says he does not see any budgetary issues. Splendid. Now, moving on, page 21, we have footfall in the Orchard Shopping Centre. This relates, I guess, to some extent to what we were just talking about, but it's down 34.86%. Just wondering how that compares to the retail market as a whole.
Stuart,
yes,
you're on mute.
Thank you. There's quite a testing question, that one. I have to say, I think it is, let's say it was average compared to the market as a whole. Although we do see monthly management reports from the manager of the orchards, who keeps a very, very close eye on these things. And whilst for this year, 2021-22, things have picked up and getting busier and busier. But of course, for last year, you'll appreciate many of the shops were closed. Unavoidably, footfall would have fallen, but it has picked up according to how the shops have opened up again.
Splendid, thank you. Next one, Chairman, if I may, page 22. This has been covered amply, I believe, by Councillor Stockwell and Bennett. And Councillor Stockwell said that this is full fibre. It would be good to have an update on this. And I would agree with that. I would like to know, I know Simon was outlining this earlier, but I'd like to know what the plan is, what the timelines are, where it's going to be and what's going to be there. So I would welcome an update on that, because we go to parish meetings, we have what were excited parishioners in front of us, and we are telling them that we are making progress. It says here, good progress. I'm not sure what good progress is. I'd always like something like that defined. So I would welcome an update. You also mentioned, Simon, Hurstpierpoint, Falking and Poynings in the south. That's splendid. Interestingly, Poynings has improved a lot because it's had a cabinet put there, and Falking has benefited from that cabinet, and Hurstpierpoint was never too bad. You remember we did a mini survey back in 2016. It was New Timber, where there was a heady 0.5 megabits per second that they were getting. That wasn't mentioned. I wonder what's happening in New Timber. And Pycombe, parts of that were getting an equally heady 0.5. So what is happening in those two villages? So I agree, I'd like an update at some stage when that is appropriate in a hopefully not too distant future. But if you could give me some comfort now, please, about Pycombe and New Timber, I'd be very grateful. Thank you.
Before you answer, Simon, Councillor Judy Lillenberg, Deputy Leader, would like to come in, please. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I think in a way we're going to get down into too much detail talking on on a village by village basis. And I understand that the rural connectivity is going to go through on the south of Burgess Hill to the west and the east. And of course, not to be forgotten is the gigabyte scheme that's cutting into the villages as well, and that is operational. And having sat in the same, as my ward is a rural ward, I've sat in the same position that I believe Councillor Trumble's in, where people want to see it tomorrow and you've had to say, oh, can you wait 18 months? But now we are seeing the rollout visibly of the gigabyte voucher scheme and promises by the local provider that will happen. So could I mean, I won't stop Simon Hughes from please filling in on the detail that he's available, but it might be better with the chairman's permission, but it might be better if we delay it so that we can have a more detailed member training situation like we had 18 months, 2 years ago, didn't we, about and we talked about backhaul and the spine and just, you know, the detail of that to see where we are and to get a detailed program, because I think that we are on the way of rolling everything out. You can see the full fibre going in Burgess Hill. The statistics are there on burgesshill.net. It is happening. So if we could have a member get together, I'm sure that members outside the Scrutiny Committee will want to know about it as well. And then we can get some dates for when we think it will be completed, which I would have thought, you know, some of the rural sites would be at the end of this financial year for us. But we just got to, there are so many ifs and buts, as Simon was explaining. So I would prefer it to leave it for a training session, if that's acceptable, Chairman.
Absolutely acceptable. I think we don't want to get down to too much of the nitty-gritty and detail in this meeting. So sorry, Simon, I was going to steal your thunder there, but I absolutely agree. Is that something you will initiate, Councillor Judy Lillenberg? Member training?
Yes, certainly I will. I'll put that in action. Thank you.
Brilliant. Okay, right. That is good. That closes that debate. Thank you very much for that. The recommendations are on page 9.
Hang on, Chairman. I'm sorry. There are more points.
How many more have you got, Councillor Trumbull?
Let me see. Apart from having to tell the parishioners of Pycombe and New Timber they will have to wait, we've had on page 23, just 2 more points, number of visits made to leisure centres. And there was a bit of a lift up, which was great. Do we know what the situation is going forward in the past month? Is it continuing to progress?
I'm just trying to see who can answer that. Is there somebody here that has got that level of detail?
I can. We've just done the April figures for the performance update, and I think we had about 38,000 visits to the leisure centres this month. I think that started on the 12th of April when they reopened.
And
they've opened at reduced capacity because obviously they need to do the social distancing.
And what was April last year? Well, perhaps not last year, the year before, 2019. Any idea? Just to get.
I don't have that information, I'm afraid.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry to try and put you on the spot. Okay.
Thank you.
Next.
And just one more point, if I may, Chairman, on page 27, we have the average amount of time spent in temporary accommodation, which is 196 days. I know it's a bit down on what was the value in 2019-20. I'm just wondering what the cost of that is and how that compares to budget. Thank you, Chairman.
Yeah. Mr. Stewart, did you get the question?
Sorry, I did get the question. I really can't answer questions about things that aren't on the aren't in the papers, I'm afraid. So again, the written response will be.
Okay, we'll get a written answer. Thank you very much. Yeah. Thank you. Okay, thank you very much for a robust discussion. The recommendations are on page 9. One, note the council's out-term performance and progress with council priority projects 2021 and identify any areas where further report information is required. And 2, advise the cabinet of any issues that the committee considers should be given particular consideration at the cabinet meeting on the 7th of June 2021. Please use the, if you agree with those recommendations, the yes, no buttons.
Chair, I can neither agree nor disagree because I wasn't here for the entire discussion.
I should advise the committee that you are here, but thank you for that. Okay, that is passed 13 by 13 votes to 0. Thank you. Okay, moving forward, item 8, community management and asset transfer policy, to be introduced by Emma Sheridan, please. Pages 29 to 44.
Actually, Leanne's going to introduce that, Chair.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. So the draft policy is, the committee is asked to consider the draft policy and agree any comments or recommendations prior to consideration by Cabinet and Council. The Council owns a number of community facilities, many of which are already leased to community groups and town and parish councils. So this policy is not new, but the draft aims to set out a clear framework and formalise the process. The council is expecting a number of new community buildings to be provided as a result of large housing developments in the district. And these facilities, our existing facilities and the new ones, are really best managed at a local level, as the council does not have the resources to manage a large number of public buildings and run a full community programme. So the transfer policy sets out the principles, process and information required when considering requests to transfer council-owned assets to community managers. The aim is to provide support to public and voluntary sector partners to enable them to deliver neighbourhood services which are sustainable and of benefit to local residents. The draft policy details the criteria which needs to be met with regard to the applicants, the assets and the proposed use of the building. Lease terms will be negotiable, and as a general principle, all asset transfers will be cost neutral or generating income for the council. Leases will be accompanied by a management agreement outlining the tenant's responsibilities to manage and maintain the building and to deliver a community service based on their business plan proposal. I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Councillors. Councillor Andrew Lee, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So quite an interesting paper. It's certainly a worthwhile thing to do. May I draw the committee's attention to page 33? I've got a minor point, then a slightly bigger point. So on page 33, it says amongst the criteria, it should be non-discriminatory, fully inclusive, embrace diversity. I think this needs to be, as it were, slightly broader, but also more specific. Maybe we should be saying it should comply with all relevant equality and employment legislation there at that particular point. Anyway, that was the minor point. But my bigger point is about when the criteria for whether the site can be transferred in such a way. And so we read on the next page on 34, transfer would not be contrary to any obligation or existing covenant. I think we should have another carve out, as it were, which would be transfer would not reduce the amount of open recreational space available to mid-Sussex residents. And those are the end of my points. Thank you very much.
Elaine.
Okay, thank you. On the first point, yeah, I think that's definitely a good one and something we could just amend and include in the policy. On the second point, there are instances where we have developed new facilities on recreational land. So there are a couple of projects at the moment that are in development and where that has been appropriate. So for example, to give you an example, the new Anstey Village Hall
where we did a land swap with the owners so we could extend the car park and we used some of the recreational land. So there are the legal processes that we have to go through to allow us to do that. And there are planning rules that stop us from using that land for other things. So there are safeguards, but I think to make it a flat no, that we wouldn't consider that, would limit us in some instances.
Thank you.
May I come back on that, Chair?
Yeah, very briefly, please. Yeah.
No, thank you. I'd still slightly stick to my guns on this one. So maybe it could then say, except in exceptional circumstances or something, because I think in principle we should not be reducing the amount of open recreational land. And in the example you cited, which was a good one, of course there's a land swap, so arguably it didn't reduce. I don't want us to be reducing the amount of recreational land, so I would still like that to be there. Maybe that could be put forward to the cabinet in their discussions. Thank you.
Okay, we'll put that forward. And your equality one. Councillor Pulford, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm looking on page 33 on the appendix, and the applicant must. Could there be a bit of background to check as to the financial ability and the efficacy of the organisation which is taking it on? And in the event of failure, does it revert back to Mid Sussex District Council? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Elaine?
Sorry, when you say page 33, which paragraph in the policy are you looking at?
Mr. Chairman, Appendix 1, page 33, 6A, the applicant must.
All right, okay.
And so just to repeat my question, we're looking at the efficacy and the ability and the financial stability of the organisation which you're transferring the asset to. In the event of its failure, does that asset revert back to Mid Sussex District Council, or does it go to the hands of an administrator to sell off to whoever would purchase it?
Okay. No, the purpose of this is to secure the asset for community use for the long term. And as you say, we can assess the proposal and the business plan put forward at that stage, but obviously for some of these longer leases, people come and go, circumstances change, and we need as a council to be able to take back control of that building if it is failing, which is really the purpose of the management agreement, which is a side letter to the lease, which explains exactly what the tenant is obliged to do. And if they are failing in that respect, it gives us some legal recourse to try and deal with that.
Thank you. Councillor,
of course,
sorry, Tom.
Of course, we remain the landlord. So as with any lease, if the tenant fails, the property comes back to the landlord.
Thank you, Tom. Councillor Alison Bennett.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Chairman. I did email a couple of questions in earlier on today, and I'm not planning to go through all of them. One question was basically Councillor Lee's point about loss of recreational land, and I'd support his point on that. Broadly, I was curious about why this policy is being brought forward now. I noted at the front of the report there was reference to a January government announcement that may have speeded this up. So I'm just wondering why it's happened now when it wasn't in the forward work programme for the Scrutiny Committee when that was agreed. Do you want to answer that, and then I'll
Mr.
raise
Clark,
my smaller
do you
points?
want to take that one?
I think it's as Ms. Clark said at the beginning, there are a number of these facilities coming forward, and we felt it better to have a policy in case there's more than one person wanting to look at managing it. So it gives a way of understanding what a potential tenant can offer.
Okay, thank you. I mean, that makes perfect sense. I suppose my question then is why it wasn't on the work programme when we signed off on that at the beginning of the year. But I think maybe that's a point for discussing when we look at the final agenda item on this meeting about agreeing our future work programme, which I'm sadly not going to be here for because I need to leave the meeting shortly. But I'll just leave that there as a thought about whether we're planning our work programme for this scrutiny committee appropriately or not. Moving on page 33, in the same section that Councillor Pulford was referring to, so paragraph 6, section A, about 2/3 of the way down, there's a point about community groups not promoting political activities or religious beliefs. I totally support that, but my only concern is, and my concerns on other points I want to raise, is about the capacity of communities generally to take on quite onerous management of large facilities, or even small and medium-sized facilities. I don't think there's this huge resource of untapped volunteer time where people have got the skills and the time and the long-term commitment over many years to do this. I mean, there are in some cases, but we can't be certain of that. But one thing I did want to observe was that there are a number of churches in the district who do a lot of this work. So are we saying that a church could not take on an asset, even if there was an understanding that they would not sort of push religion in that facility? Because if we are saying that, then I think that's a potentially a sort of good and credible source of community organisation that would be kind of cutting ourselves off from.
Mr. Clark or Elaine?
Yes, I mean, I think the intention is to ensure that the buildings are fully accessible, open to everyone is welcome. And I think with if we allow the churches to run the buildings, I think there's a danger that becomes focused on those groups rather than a wider community asset. So that criteria is in there to ensure that they are non-secular, open community spaces. But there's no reason why a church couldn't set up, for example, some kind of subsidiary or social enterprise to run these community spaces, which they do, which they have done in other places. And in terms of capacity, I totally take your point. I think it is onerous and demanding for groups, particularly voluntary sector and voluntary groups, and to take on these buildings. And I think that's where community services has got a strong development role to play in trying to build capacity and help groups come forward. So in places like Bolnor, for example, where the new community facility was transferred to a trust, that trust was established specifically to run and manage that building. And we worked for a number of years really with the community to set up the business plan and put everything in place. So I think these are long-term projects and they do take quite a lot of development time and support. And
okay.
Yeah, I think it is a challenge.
So I'd like to make sort of two further points, if I may. One is about contingency plans. So there are two examples of this in the report that I wanted to highlight. Page 34, it talks about when the council advertises a development. What are we going to do if nobody applies for that? And I think maybe when the county have been sort of putting out to tender for academies, there have been some instances where there's a need for a school, but no academy trust or free school wants to come forward. And then at the flip side of that, if we get to a point where we've leased an asset to a community group and it's not worked out for whatever reason, will MSDC then, recognising that it's so tight on resource, have the capacity to take it back in-house? And that's sort of a conversation we were having last autumn about Clare Hall coming out of the Places Leisure contract, but actually MSDC not being able to take that on. So I'd just like to encourage thoughts about how we contingency plan for those scenarios to happen at Cabinet, if that's possible. Thank you.
Hello, thank you.
Yeah, so in response to that, as a fallback, the facility would come back to the council to manage. And we do that in some instances. We take bookings for pavilions, we manage some of these community buildings already, but I think what we can offer is fairly limited. So we'll hire space and we'll take bookings. But in terms of a neighbourhood resource centre, if it's managed locally, it can be much more than that. So I think as a temporary arrangement, we can manage that and deal with that. But I think in those instances, we would be looking for alternative local solutions, you know, and we might have to step in for a time while we try and work with local community groups who might have an interest and, as you say, might need some support to actually take on the responsibility to manage the building.
Thank you. Councillor Hicks.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I'd fully support encouraging local groups and ensuring that there isn't one size fits all in terms of having a policy that may exclude them, and thinking particularly about consortiums and partnership arrangements where small community groups can be supported by larger organisations. I'm just a bit concerned that it may be a bit too prescriptive in terms of things like asking for 3 years financial accounts, given the example that was given about a new group, which is often the case to manage these premises, would be a new community group that wouldn't have that sort of track record. So I just urge that it doesn't become too prescriptive, and perhaps if we could just consider these sort of new groups and how we would encourage them in terms of the final draft. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Is Councillor Judy, anybody you want to come in there?
Yes, please. I thought it might be helpful just to draw members' attention, particularly new members, that this policy is really a formalising of what has been going on and what has been happening, because we do have a number of community buildings that are leased by Mid Sussex District Council. They are under agreements, and we've got some new ones coming forward, and we thought it was better in terms of transparency, so that everyone is aware of what is happening and what the rules are, because we are, if you like, a facilitator. We want community groups to work. We want communities to be able to use buildings and to have the buildings that are fit for purpose for them to use in the right places, and to have the right sort of buildings in the right time for the communities themselves. And this is a good way, the best way we could find, of having a policy that delivers that. So when, for example, Councillor Hicks is talking about 3 years accounts, of course, you know, we have a duty to make sure that that organisation is as viable as possible, and we will help. We want the people that use the buildings and the groups to succeed. So this is a positive measure rather than trying to stop people. It's trying to help people be transparent and get the best use for our community buildings. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Janice Henwood.
Thank you, Chairman. Just one question to start with. Page 35, item number 15. Could you please tell me what the BUL is? Proposals for developments on recreation land must be approved by the BUL.
Hello?
Business unit leader.
Yeah.
Business unit leader. Thank you very much. I would really like also to support Councillor Lee's suggestion. Recreation space is too precious. If there can be written in some criteria to further safeguard any recreational space from development, I think that would be advantageous. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. That will be noted. Councillor Gibson. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Let me say, in general, I mean, I support the whole concept. I've got no difficulty with the criteria which we're asking of the groups that might take ownership. Problems I have with this are really its lack of ambition on the input side of the buildings that feed into this. I think it highlights the benefit of pushing our housing into strategic development, where you've got the large sums of S106 coming through and being able to put together in a way in which it will deliver new buildings, new facilities. I'm determined not to ride any hobby horses, but I will point out that around in the village of Crawley Down, we've generated somewhere around about £5 million worth of S106. But because it's come in a fragmented way, then that hasn't really led to the ability to put together these new facilities. It's been just seems to have ebbed away on little bits and pieces. I pulled out the paper that on the community ownership fund, of which we're due to see the government's advice on how our communities can bid into that in the future. Because certainly in my area, I have communities which are seeking to take opportunity in order to bring, and the definition here is interesting, important parts of the social fabric, such as pubs, sports clubs, theatres and post offices. And I just wonder whether or not this paper could not, this policy could not have actually moved a little more in that direction, in order that it not only talked about those things which are existing in an existing ownership, but underused, of which I know of very few, I must admit, and the new things which might come in these large strategic developments. Obviously, I'm pointing towards supporting communities in the purchase, and then I think it hinges on the way in which in the appendix under 6B, the asset has to be in the freehold ownership. So I guess my question boils down to, could it be conceived that an asset would be purchased in order to go through into this policy? And I thank you. I apologize for making a roundabout route into that way, but I hope you can see exactly what I'm prompting to, to the objective should be.
Thank you, Councillor Gibson. Mr. Clark or Elaine?
I mean, in terms of the Section 106, what we can require of developers is written into our planning policy documents. So, we ask for contributions towards community buildings. In larger developments, we do ask for them to be provided on site, and we are kind of bound by those rules. And I agree, the fragmented bits of money don't make these things easy to deliver necessarily. So in projects like, for example, the one at Anstey, that had to be delivered in a phased way. So as we draw in additional money, we can. So that's one. That's one answer, part of the answer. In terms of actually purchasing assets for communities, I think I'd have to refer that to somebody else.
Councillor Julie Llewellyn-Burke wants to come in, please.
Yeah, as regards purchasing assets for a community, that would be subject to the business case as any other asset.
Thank you. Councillor Trumbull.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to return to Councillor Bennett's point earlier, which is item 6A, and not promoting political activities and religious beliefs. I agree with that totally and absolutely. And good heavens, we don't want something set up to promote political views and activities. That would be awful. And we shouldn't have something which is specifically about a religious belief. But Councillor Bennett made the point about community groups may not always have the ability to run such assets. And Elaine Clark will have long memories of Court Bushes and where we were involved in the painful process of trying to move the lease from a group that could not manage that to somewhere where it could be managed adequately. We were successful in the end, but it was a long, long process. But I think that demonstrates that quite often community groups do not have the necessary skills, and it's difficult for them to have that. But I agree with Councillor Bennett. Some religious organisations do. And I've got one in mind in particular that runs an excellent community cafe facility at Court Bushes. I've been there many times myself, supping lukewarm coffee and tea, and nowhere do they actually promote religious beliefs. They're there purely as a community activity. They certainly have the skills, abilities and wherewithal to manage such an organisation. I would hate that we rule them out of being able to do so. I would just like some comfort that such a group could manage an asset like this. Thank you, Chairman.
Deputy Leader, did you want to come back in? Hands still up.
We're talking, Councillor Trumbull's given a specific example of a community cafe, which is different than the leaseholder, isn't it? So, I mean, we'll have a discussion about on the specific item at Cabinet. I think we should about political and religious groups. There are reasons why they are excluded because it is so sensitive for people. But I think there's also the point that cases should be taken on their merit. And by saying you're not going to have a particular group taking the lease, you will have other specific groups, but they may allow religious groups to use the building. So like, for example, with a community cafe, if that is run by a religious group, I don't know, they have gone through some form of regulation, and I'm afraid I don't know the detail of this particular case, that says they're competent to do it. So there are other competency measures in. What we're trying to do is to prevent exclusion of particular bodies. So we're trying to make everything as inclusive as possible to enable everyone to use the buildings and be comfortable using them. Now, when they're allocated at particular times for particular uses by particular groups, that's up to the lessee, I would have thought, unless Mr. Stewart wants to chip in and put me right where I've gone wrong.
Mr. Stewart,
well, I wasn't going to correct the councillor, of course not. No, I simply can add, I suppose, that this is very much an art, not a science. It is very hard to write a policy document to let some people in, and not let others in. What we're trying to do here is present a broad picture of the type of organisations we'd like to run our community assets. And of course, if they are a political group, a religious group who are formed to promote a value, and of course, some parts of religious groups have offshoots that are not part of the, if you like, the sort of the promotion side of things, that would be perfectly acceptable. But it is very much a case of each case in its own merits within this broad policy framework.
Thank you. Councillor Coote, welcome to the meeting. You're on mute.
Thank you, Chairman. I must apologise, but I've got some grommet in my system today, and I've had murders all round. It's British Telecom. We've only had telephones for the last 200 years, but every time they got a spare staff, they send them down to Furnace Wood to muck about with the telephone. So my humble apologies, Chairman.
Okay, thank you. I see no other speakers. Points I picked up on to members wanted to take forward to Cabinet are the no loss of space from recreational space, the debate around religion, political groups, and Councillor Lee's point about the equity clause there. I think let's grasp that. So moving on to the recommendations on page 29, the committee is asked to consider the policy principles and process and agree any comments or recommendations that it wishes to make prior to consideration by Cabinet and Council. So if you would please use the yes, no buttons. And that has been passed unanimously. Thank you very much. Moving on to item 9, the committee work programme for 21-22, and Mr. Clark is going to introduce this.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. As members know, this committee has a certain responsibility for the council budget and also monitors performance. So those are the items in your programme of meetings at the moment, Chairman.
Okay, has anybody got any comments? Councillor Lee.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Not about the actual contents of the what the meetings are, which will all make sense. But I'd just like to modify the recommendation that talks about the work programme to add, and that meetings will start at 5:30 if virtual, or 7 PM if in person. Thank you.
Thank you for that point, because I had a discussion with the officers and the vice chairman in the week, and I wondered if members would consider it going to 6 o'clock in virtual and 7 at the normal time in real meetings. I'd be interested to see who would agree to 6 o'clock to virtual meetings for our scrutiny meeting, not the others.
Mr. Chairman, point of order.
Of course.
I believe it was agreed that there would be a discussion amongst group leaders about the timing of meetings. So I don't think this committee should set any recommendation.
Okay, that's a fair comment. Mr. Clark, would you like to comment on that? Because
well, you're both right in a way. Councillor Gibson is right that that's what was agreed, but individual committees can agree their own arrangements for meeting, and indeed you as chairman can call meetings.
Okay. I think then what we should do is ask the group leaders to come back to me for this particular meeting what they would like to see, and then we'll take it from there. Yeah.
Chair, if
yes.
I may. No, I'd like to put that forward that the meetings will start, as you say, at 6 if virtual, or 7 p.m. if in person. I would like that to be the recommendation.
Okay, you're putting forward that as motion. Anybody want to second that?
Yes, I'll second.
Or Councillor Henwood, thank you.
I'll second it. Yes.
So just to clarify, you was it 6 o'clock or 5:30, Councillor Lee?
I don't mind. So let's say 6 o'clock, because that's what you suggested.
Okay,
just
that's
now.
second, is it, Councillor Henwood? Okay. All right, we'll take a vote on that. 6 o'clock for virtual, 7 for in real person. Please vote yes or no. I haven't voted myself, have I? Yes, sir. Okay, the vote on that is 12 for, 1 against and 1 abstention. I think the next meeting is not till September, so we may well be back in the chamber. Let's see how things span out. So the recommendation is the committee is recommended to agree the indicative work programme set out in paragraph 5 with the motion down of 6 o'clock to start in for virtual meetings. So all those in favour of the recommendation? Okay, 13 in favour and 1 abstention. Thank you. Item 10, questions pursuant to Council Procedure Rule 10.2 due to notice has been given. I have none. Therefore, I close the meeting at 18:28. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Once again, my apologies, Chairman, for being late.
Okay.